to Mental Illness and Pop Culture. We are coming from the pandemic here in quarantine land. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're trying to reintroduce ourselves. We haven't had a new episode for a while. I'll start out. I'm Scott.
I'm Leanne.
And I'm Joe.
Hey, this is Mental Illness and Pop Culture. We are back on the air, first time ever with video. And speaking of video, we've got a special surprise at the end. 30 years in the making. I'm going to be finally debuting a song I wrote and recorded in 1990, and I've made a special video for that. We'll have that at the end. How are you guys doing?
I'm tired.
Yeah.
You be tired, man.
I did dishes for 45 minutes today. Come on.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm good. Can't complain.
Yeah.
Well, shouldn't complain at
Right.
the very least.
Yeah.
I mean, we're alive, so
That's right.
there's that.
So
Yes.
far. Yeah.
So far, Scott. How are you besides alive?
Right. I feel like, so for me right now, I've adapted and adjusted. I'm kind of thriving. I feel guilty about it because I know a lot of people are having a horrible time. But just something about, I don't know if it's my age group or being single. Here I am in bachelor land, pandemia, and I'm doing deep dives into my pantry, trying to see what is the oldest food I can find in there. I did find a pineapple can that the citric acid had burned through the lid. So I think I brought that with me when I moved here in 2001. Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yes. Pretty incredible.
It's a
Yeah.
science experiment.
It kind of is. Yeah. And the other thing that's been, well, a few things have been happening for me. One is my generation, you know, about all of us middle-aged people, I've got like new friends. We're hanging out on Facebook, and I feel like it's been this really creative time, at least right now. I had a tough time at first. I'll talk about that in a little bit.
For me, it hasn't been. I have not gone stir crazy or anything like that, to use the parlance of our times. And you know, I've always enjoyed being at home and just being able to just putter around and do my thing. And you know, I feel like this time being at home is far less stressful for me than it is for some other folks. And I can understand how people out there can start getting a little feeling like they're being closed in, and you know, and even how some folks out there, especially in social media and whatnot, feel like, you know, their rights are being taken away, and you know, all these arguments that are popping up right now. But of course, you know, no one's rights are being taken away. It's just, unfortunately, this is an unprecedented moment for pretty much most everybody in the United States right now. We haven't had a situation like this since 1919 with the flu pandemic. So it is an inconvenience, and it's a drag, but it's also a good time to step back and, you know, count your blessings and take up a new hobby and catch up on all the pop culture that you missed because of your typical normal, to, you know, probably use the term normal, daily practices.
I am very excited to report that my first Zoom cocktail party is in 2 hours. That's all the time we're getting from me today. You know, I had a really, really hard time in the first 2 weeks. So in my professional world, well, the service is kind of my food, you know, and it's certainly what I do for work. And so I got very, very lonely. I live alone and 2 great dogs, thank God. But I got very, very lonely. It really bothered me for a couple of weeks. But really, I was missing the people I serve. And so I kind of felt like I think there was a moment where I was afraid that there was some purposeless thing going to happen. But and some people who are listening know, but I run a homeless shelter. So that was very interesting. I had 60 guests, and then 32 employees, and about 10 days to make some really serious decisions with a whole lot of unknowns. Very much most stressful time for me. So that was hard to be at home because then you're by yourself, you're alone, who you're processing all this with, and you're really trying to save lives. I didn't just come home to protect me. I had to figure out how to protect kind of a mass. So that was a very different stress level, which is still true. I have not had a day off yet since this thing because stuff happens on Saturdays and Sundays too. So it's interesting. It's certainly a new dynamic for all of us. But I'm hanging. Dogs are cool.
So I know also that, I mean, you had to do some things pretty rapidly.
Mhm.
You had people within fairly close quarters. That's normal living situation. And I know you had to do lots of organizing to find places for people to be. And there's a lot of pieces and parts that have to be all fit into place.
Yeah, it continues. I had an interview with a college student who is quarantined. She goes to Mizzou, but she's in St. Charles, Illinois. And she was interviewing me yesterday, and her lead question was, so how have things changed in the last 6 weeks? I'm like, how long do you have? There's absolutely not a procedure that was normal before that is the same today in a 6 week time, and probably in 2 weeks to make it effective. But yeah, I mean, just to refer to that, we moved our guests into hotels so that they could actually be isolated and have their own autonomy. We provide them with food and toiletries and PPE as well, and case management and other resources that they need. But they are off-site at this time, and we don't have any symptoms. So very, very cool.
People should listen to the case story or case study.
Right. And it occurs to me as we're talking, and it has been a long time since we had an episode for various reasons, that some people might know what we do or why we're talking about this. So, Leanne, you are executive director of a large homeless shelter.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
go
And
ahead.
well, part of my interest in this is because it's just fun, but I am desperately trying, and this pandemic is not helping. But I am, I don't know, 20 weeks from finishing my second master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. And so this is just a part of, things I love. And again, looking at songs and documentaries and movies from that lens is really, really cool. So that's why I'm a part of this. But yes, running a homeless shelter by day, dog mom by night, pandemic queen now. I don't know. Yep, that's me.
Pandemic Queen. That sounds like a good punk song.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe we should write that too. Joe, what do you do in real life?
I'm an associate professor of curriculum and instruction and the associate director of the Center for Black Studies at Northern Illinois University. I don't want to say I know nothing about mental health. I'll just say that I am not a mental health professional. And when Scott asked me to join this motley crew of characters, I think I was asked mostly because I'm, neck deep into pop culture. If there's any conversation that I love to have more than any other, it's definitely, what's the best TV show out right now? What's the best movie? What's great music? And I was describing to my wife, once that it's not so much that I have a lot of favorites of everything, right? But I'm really fascinated with aspects of pop culture, artists, entertainers, etc., that pioneer new things, that push genres in new directions. The forerunners, so to speak, the innovators. Because I'm really just captivated with how someone, say, can pull like 4 or 5 musicians together with barely any music and make one of the greatest recordings of all time. That would be an example of Miles Davis and Kind of Blue, and how his, you know, what's the backstory behind all these things, you know, and understanding, because, you know, people say, oh, well, it's just an album, or it's just a movie, or it's just a book, or what have you. And it's like, no, it's not just, you know, to put that word just into that sentence, I think is a disservice to the gravity that some cultural creations power of changing our culture, let alone adding to it, is a really, really important thing that pushes humanity. So I don't think that these things are trivial by any stretch of the imagination. And I mean, and not even talking about the amount of commerce that goes into all this. So it's not like the topics that we talk about, or the subjects that we talk about, whether that be, you know, a film like Ordinary People, all the way to Joker. These things are highly consumed, and I think it's important for all of us to not just consume things, but to also think a little bit more critically about things. And that's one of the reasons why I was really interested in this podcast, because I never really talked about the mental illness or mental health aspects of the things that we watch, even when they're direct themes. You know, it's kind of, we always kind of seem to kind of skirt those conversations. So this podcast has, you know, really encouraged me to think more deeply about how we represent mental health issues in American popular culture.
Well said, sir.
Well, that was profound. And so hearing the two of you talk about that, and I am a counselor educator. I'm also an associate professor. In 2 weeks, I will have been in this position for 20 years. I'll have completed 20 years. And I am retiring in 4 months and 6 days. So I am about to become a counselor educator for hire.
How do you get to retire at like 25?
I know.
Because I started teaching when I was 2.
I knew there was something special about you.
No, believe it or not, I have 32 years in education, in public education in Illinois. And how this podcast came about, I'll talk a little bit about the history. I want to avoid psycho killer, and I want to avoid multiple personalities, but I do want to bring to light issues related to professional helping and mental health. That's my goal.
Also stay away from schizophrenia.
Yeah.
The way that schizophrenia, like every schizophrenic on any given television show is only on there because they killed someone, which is
always
so not the truth about
Folks
suffering from schizophrenia.
Yeah. People with mental health issues, and we are all among them at any given time, but people with mental health issues are far more likely to be a victim of violence than to be a perpetrator of violence. Yeah. So here we are in this pandemic, the time of COVID. I thought maybe we could talk about our title topics, mental health issues that either we've been experiencing or that we're aware of people are experiencing. And also, I think that there has just been a creative explosion of entertainment and art during this time. I thought we might talk about that too. Let's go with entertainment first.
Are we going to have to talk about Tiger King?
I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you did. Yeah.
If we must.
Okay, so, oh gosh.
It's like watching a train wreck. You can't stop watching it. It's engaging.
Kind of like the press briefings.
It provoked a lot of compassion in me, honestly. It was very, I think, hard and sad to watch. Many characters, many people in that story that are ill,
Yeah.
I think, confused at many levels. I'm being general, but that was a startling portrayal of mental illness and a domino effect on so many different organizations and people and lives. I don't know. That was hard to watch. I just watched it like a week ago, so I'm still, maybe 2 weeks ago, still raw on that. Did you watch that, Joe?
Yeah, I watched it.
Ugh.
I mean, it was well made. It was a compelling story. The way the story was edited together, I thought was pretty compelling, and my interest was definitely hooked for at least the first 3, maybe 4 episodes. But my biggest gripe about the docuseries was that it was too damn long. I think they could have done the same story with as much depth with 4 episodes instead of 7. It
So
was
not,
7 episodes, wasn't it? If I'm not mistaken, I feel
not
like
even,
it was that long.
so not being a mental health professional, what did you, thinking about it from that lens, what do you think about? What did you see?
I felt that there were a lot of people that I don't want to say it. I felt that there were a lot of people in the film, especially the 2 primary characters, that were clearly dealing with something deeper than just, this this duel or this between themselves and their respective positions. But I kind of, and I never thought I would live to see the day that I said something like this, but I had less sympathy for them and far more sympathy for the Tigers. Because I felt like throughout the entire show, it was the Tigers who were being exploited. And both of them were exploiting them. And so by the time it was all over with, the only thing that I was really wondering was, so are the proceeds from this docu-series going to be used to purchase some of these tigers and take them somewhere that is much more appropriate for their surroundings, where they're not being treated like circus animals, and so for me, Tiger King was a really hard show to watch in terms of mental health, because my attention to the humans kept being diverted to how the big cats were being treated. So for me, the sympathetic character was neither the Tiger King or whatever the lady's name was. Carol, thank you. But it was definitely more for the tigers.
Well, you said cats, and I think of cattle, and I think of the employees who were kind of treated like cattle, and that's where my sympathy was. And especially the woman who lost an arm, which was just incredible. And I mean, could have been $1 million lawsuit, but she was loyal to Joe Exotic. And I can't remember if it was in the docuseries or I have done a little YouTube research. And with interviews with employees who just say they were incredibly exploited and underpaid, and it was dangerous.
I can't remember that other property. What was that other property, like in North or South Carolina, I feel like, or something, where he had like multiple wives or girlfriends or whatever, and then his staff was making $100 a week, and they had to work 16 hours. Remember they interviewed the girl who had left there?
Yeah.
Had all these women going.
Right.
The norm in that culture, it looked like. It's weird. And even Carol's staff is all volunteers. All. Weird.
Mhm. I know people who are huge animal lovers, and I think that people are so committed to protecting animals, and then that's what gets taken advantage of. And speaking of taking advantage of, um, the narcissism, and I'm not talking about the president, still talking about Tiger King, that must be involved in order to pay the employees so poorly to be able to treat the tigers that way. That requires an incredible ability to block yourself from empathy and from taking the perspective of these people that you are taking advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Tiger King. So I was thinking that's sort of the car wreck you can't take your eyes off of during this so far. I think there have been some amazing performances, and in some ways they may reflect different stages of us collectively dealing with and coping with the situation. So right at the beginning, it was the first weekend, and so a bunch of people in Chicago got together and recorded themselves on video, everybody singing Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer.
That's cool.
And then John Bon Jovi himself saw that and then recorded a performance of himself for the people of Chicago. I thought that was amazing. I'm not even a John Bon Jovi fan, and I thought that was so incredible.
Dude, come on. Beautiful. I don't expect you to appreciate that. We do.
But also kind of the joy and the happiness of that, to me, reflected the beginning part. That my experience of adapting and adjusting to this, and I will say it started rough for me. It started quite rough, and I've transformed. But that first part is sort of what I would classify with denial or shock. And so, you haven't really fully realized the impact yet. And so it was like this happy thing. And then I think sort of, that denial, reality keeps checking in. And for me, the idea that here I am just about to retire, and now I have to redesign my curriculum so that I can teach it all online. That was stressful. It's first world problem for sure, but that was stressful to me, and it still is stressful to me not knowing how this is all going to turn out. There is a lot of uncertainty, and Joe, I think you alluded to, people on social media, some people talking about their rights are being violated, and there are people who believe that the way to protest is to defy social distancing, to defy staying at home, to defy wearing masks. And it's dangerous, and it's putting other people in danger. So that's part of what is on my mind, especially at the beginning, the not knowing. And so this is before the Apex in New York. We didn't know what the numbers were going to be, but we knew there was going to be this wave of death. And we don't know who that we know, or who that we know will have somebody that they know who is affected and impacted by this. And I think that's really, really anxiety provoking. It touches our core existential fears and beliefs, and we need to cope. We need to defend ourselves. And so that to me was sort of the second phase, was like this strong coping. And at that same time, it was when we were supposed to be planning for how we were going to teach our classes And of course, I had all my papers due right before midterm, and then this came along, so I hadn't graded them. And I think, Leanne, I think you and I talked one time, and I said, it's hard to give feedback from a fetal position,
Mm-hmm.
And I say that jokingly. I was not in a literal fetal position, but I was in a lay on my couch without thinking all day position.
Mm-hmm.
And just to try to distract myself. And so I want to talk about some of the symptoms of this that I experienced, mainly, say, in the first 3 weeks or so. I am generally feeling pretty good right now. In fact, when I say generally pretty good, I'm feeling better than I was before this all happened. But some of the symptoms that I experienced in the high anxiety time, which was about the first 3 weeks for me, one is forgetfulness, a lot of forgetfulness. I had a lot, and I still have this happen where I walk into a room and I forget why I'm there. And I have a lot of the tip of the tongue phenomena, and it's so annoying. It's already actually even happened during this conversation we're having, that like I get a little idea and I put it in the back of my mind to come back to later, but then I have no idea what it was. And so I find myself in mid-sentence, still a little bit, forgetting even what I was just talking about. And then I also think during times of intense stress, like whatever sort of unresolved lingering issues that somebody might have, they kind of get brought to the forefront. Mm-hmm. And for me, this anxiety, and I have had some traumatic events in my life that I am really only now coming to terms with. But so at the beginning, the first 2 to 3 weeks, I would wake up shaking. And it wouldn't be like right that moment when I woke up, but wake up, get out of bed. It takes me about 10 to 15 seconds to get from my bedroom to the kitchen. And by the time I'm in the kitchen, like my body is shaking. And it came from this not knowing what was on the other side of it. I feel a little better now, even though I think we still have a long, long way to go. Those are some of the things that come to my mind.
Well, I'll be vulnerable. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
No, please, by all means.
So I have an attachment disorder. I was raised by a mentally ill mother, or I raised my mentally ill mother is probably more accurate, honestly. And so I have a high level of codependence, high need for purposeful stuff, like I mentioned earlier. But I have a really hard time with loss. So in those first couple of weeks, I felt like, I mean, and again, we're trapped in our own skin, right? It's happening to everybody, but it's happening different for everybody. But I just felt like anything that was valuable, again, that I was doing, the stuff that makes me feel better as a human, was somehow going to be taken away from me. And then I have the responsibility of what became very life and death of all these other people. So all of that was chaos on the inside for me. I was very weepy. I have a friend that uses the term weepy, and I think that describes it. So, I could be trying to have professional conversations, not even really thinking about anything specific to what was going on, and just really feel this hole, this loss. And that's, that's an attachment issue for me, for sure. So it is better now. I did have literal fetal position moments. I mean, in my bed kind of thing, but like, I got to go take a nap because I can't feel this anymore. And it wasn't always full thoughts and concepts. It was just uncertainty. I mean, again, that's the same as we have now. Just sad, it's level of depression, right? I think I had less anxiety and more of the sadness piece of it, for sure. And that, again, so that's like stuff from my childhood presents. So I already have that stuff. There's some mental illness in that. And then this thing just fuels it. And really quickly, while I'm thinking about that, I talked about we moved our guests out of shelter into rooms, which is cool. I mean, it seems autonomous, and that's wonderful, and certainly way better accommodations than bunk beds right next to each other in a shelter. Um, so this is the experience that we're seeing, and I have colleagues, and you can imagine that this is going to be even more profound in a bit, but just what Scott and I, and I'm sure Joe's going to share too, so just being, you know, general population, not the most vulnerable population of folks, we're experiencing all this stuff, and it's causing reaction. It's causing us to have symptoms. So when you're talking about people that are in poverty or homeless, this situation is, you know, if they were in recovery for substance abuse, they're not now. I mean, there's some, you know, because we're going to feel better in this wherever we can. Like we were just talking about having cocktail parties on Zoom. Like that's what we're all doing, right? So it's increasing whether we're the most vulnerable population or not. And all the mental illness things are popping. We're seeing all kinds of things show up. But even folks like, I do have a schizophrenic guest, for example, who is not medicated. We can't get him to the doctor because he can't remember to be at the doctor, all of those things. And he literally doesn't know what's going on. Like he doesn't understand why. Like he can understand the words of putting on the mask and, you know, here's the reason why, but it disconnects pretty quickly and he can't understand. And so we moved him to a hotel, actually a different hotel, to keep others safe because he can't understand what's happening. So that's also really sad too. So you see people with kind of more profound mental illnesses where that kind of pops up as well. So it's all levels. And I think we're going to have, I'm having a lot of meetings with partners for our shelter to prepare. One, we've got 26 million people on unemployment. So in a few months, we're going to have a housing issue, right? So we're going to have an increased number of folks. But then our partners that serve from mental health and substance recovery counseling, all those kind of things. You know, one of them said to me the other day, I think that we should start furloughing our staff because we're just doing these Zoom calls with folks. And I said, no, I want you to go find grants or whatever you need to do to start hiring, because in a couple of months, all of this is going to come together. Failure of job loss, probably house loss. You know, it's going to keep going. Even if we get released into the world right now, it's going to take so long, and that's not going to happen. It's going to take so long to rebound from it. We're going to see I call it popcorn. We're going to see it popcorn, and certainly mental illness is a big part of that. That was a heck of a speech. Thanks, guys. She just keeps talking. What were you going to say, Joe?
So when all this started breaking out, I immediately had to go into caretaker mode because I was on a spring break trip with a bunch of students. And so during that week of spring break was when the news began to start spreading that this was something that was like deadly serious. And so spending the week trying to make sure or help my students be calm and, you know, just take in the information and try to process it in a healthy way and start strategizing what was going to happen when we got back to, campus and, you know, getting everything squared away. But when and the students were fine. And as far as I know, no one's contracted the virus. But my mom, who lives down in Memphis, was visiting Illinois, and she was supposed to come and hang out at my house and then fly back home. And so she was visiting folks down in Peoria. And my siblings and I were just like, we can't let mom get on a flight. So I had to drive my mom down to Memphis. This is like a 24-hour trip. I picked her up in Peoria, drove down to Memphis, spent the night in some dusty motel in Arkansas. Spent the night in some dusty motel in Arkansas and then drove back home. And, you know, not too terribly long after I'd gotten home. And for me, truthfully, when the the idea of, because I drove my mom down the day the stay-at-home order went into effect on Saturday at 5 o'clock. And so when I got back, maybe 2-3 days after I got back, my wife began to show symptoms. And so we can't necessarily officially say that she had coronavirus, COVID-19, because she was never able to be tested for it because she didn't have any pre-existing conditions or anything like that. And so they essentially just told her, take 3 weeks and ride it out. And if you get to a point where you can't breathe, go to the emergency room. It was like, and I think of all the things that was most frustrating, it was lack of solid information. It was the inability to get tested. I still have a certain level of anxiety around it all because, I can't get tested and I have underlying conditions that could aggravate COVID-19. So, for a good solid 4 weeks, if I left a room, I was washing my hands. If I had to go to the grocery store, masks weren't available. So I felt like I was playing Russian roulette every time I, went to go and try to find bread. And I think that it was those kinds of anxieties and concerns that really spun me into a bad space. However, I didn't want to, and I think this is just a part of me. I try to always be, and I don't mean this in any vulgar sense, but I always try to be the coolest person in the room, because I feel like if people look toward me and I'm over in the corner freaking out, that it's just going to make everything else that much worse. So I put that responsibility on myself, whether or not anyone expects that of me.
Can we analyze that? I'm just asking.
Well,
no diagnosing today. No diagnosing.
I mean, are you thinking of anything, Leanne?
No, I'm not doing that with you. I just want to play.
Yeah.
And so, so I found that, and there were a lot of other things that came down pretty quickly, like converting our classes to online courses and getting used to having all meetings online and all this stuff that I try to not look at as an inconvenience, but as just a necessity. It's just something that has to happen right now. And either we can roll with it as much as we can, or we can act a fool about it. And I can act, if I shouldn't speak for everyone, I can act a fool about it. And I decided to just try to roll with it best as I could. And there are frustrations, of course. Being online is great, but I still feel very, very disconnected from people. And at the same time, it's nice to have reconnected with some folks that, and talk to some people, like friends, good friends that I don't talk to as often as I ought to. So, that's been great. But at the same time, I think at the end of the day, when I'm sitting there alone and everyone's gone off to bed and, I'm in my own space, yeah, there's a lot of anxiety because there's so many questions that are just up in the air that it doesn't matter who I talk to, I can't get an answer, or at least a satisfactory answer. And then of course, there's this new old beast that we also have to deal with, social media.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another experiment in the effectiveness and uselessness of social media. On one hand, it was great to see and hear from people that I hadn't heard from in a long time. And I have these periods where I just stop engaging social media altogether. And I was like this close to canceling my Facebook account altogether. But you know, people started reaching out on Facebook and other platforms, and it was like, oh great, you know. But then all the other stuff, you know,
Yeah.
conspiracy theorists
Oh yeah.
and the political squabbles and so on and so forth. And it's almost like Tiger King. It's just a train wreck that you can't help for sitting and watching for hours on end. And I think of all the things that's really gotten me most frustrated, because in terms of any steps needed to save people's lives, I personally don't really have a big qualm about. And I know that I'm also in a pretty comfortable position because, yeah, I'm a tenured professor, and if budget cuts at the university, which are happening, I know that I'm going to be one of the last to go, you know, and Scott understands what I'm talking about. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not affected economically. It doesn't mean that I'm not affected socially. It doesn't mean that I now have to, you know, rethink the way I've done a lot of things over the years, which could be a good thing and a bad thing. So in terms of trying to deal with what's happening, I just, you know, we're lucky in this house because we have 3 levels. So we all don't have to be in the same room, in the same space for most of the day. And I think that ability to move gives all 3 of us in my home a little bit of, you know, comfort, and it's not as intense of a situation. Gina was quarantined for about a solid 3.5 weeks. So it was
I'm curious what that was like for you and Jacob.
Well, Jacob is pretty low key as well. He tries to do his best to not flip out about things. He'll like ask, you know, to get like a status. And if he feels like his answer is okay, then he can kind of just go off and do his thing. And so we haven't been on him for the amount of time that he's spending on the computer or the amount of time that he's playing Xbox or anything like that, because I know and I can hear the conversations that he's having with his friends. So he has that outlet, even though after we've been locked down for 5-6 weeks now, he is definitely starting to get, you know, itchy. When Gina was in quarantine, it was, you know, just going up and checking in and making sure she was okay and standing at the door and talking and having a conversation and getting her the things that she needed when she needed them and that kind of thing. And I don't want to go too personal because, you know, that's her story to tell, not necessarily mine. But I think that, you know, me being downstairs and just, you know, occupying myself with hours of, you know, TV shows to binge was definitely helpful. I got to be honest about it. You know, if I didn't have my buddies on The Wire or, you know, Marty and Ozark, I might be talking about this in a much different way, you know? So pop culture was definitely a friend to me through the experience. But yeah, I mean, you get lonely. It's weird being lonely in a house with people, you know? It's strange. But overall, I think that I'm coping with it pretty well. I'm not like drinking too much or anything like that, which kind of actually surprised me.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
the hardest thing is like is that contact. It's the physicality. It's walking through a grocery store. When I would go to grocery stores, Gina would ask me, "Well, what's it look like? How's it look like?" And I'm like, "It looks like going to a grocery store on a Monday night, half an hour before it closes." And that's how it always looks. Like there's nobody around. There's nobody out on the streets, and that's so it's those visual things that kind of unsettled me. But I think, you know, at the same time, I just kind of sit back and just count my blessings that things aren't, at least in my world, aren't worse.
No, that's good.
Sorry, I just kind of went on.
It's a time of gratitude, though. I mean, it's a have to or we get to, and I do think that this is a harsh lesson, but it by default does some really good things. I mean, I do think that we have to be introspective, whether we intend to be or not. There's nobody around. How much can you watch? But there's some good here. I read I had a board meeting the other night, and I do a little devotional first, and it was talking about Psalms 23. Um, most people know that, but he leads me by still waters, restores my soul, all that kind of stuff. And it really talks about rest in that scripture. And we don't. I mean, this society, this culture, this is not a restful place. And so I think that's also part of our reaction is, wait, what? Now how? This is not right.
Mhm.
And then we have a cultural space where resting is weakness.
Yeah.
It seems like I talked about the purposeful part of it for me. And so I do. I mean, I'm convinced, and I'm sure you guys are too, that there's some really great things collectively that's going to come out of this. And certainly, like Scott's saying, he's really identifying some stuff with himself and growing through this and changing on the journey. It's going to be good. It's just, it's hard, It's going to have both sides as everything.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I'm seeing more and more often on social media, oddly enough, messages about when are things going to return to normal, and counter messages of, what do you mean return to normal?
Yeah.
I mean, what was our normal? Let's think about this for a minute, and, our, being overworked and not recognizing, the humanity of others, and just rampant short-sightedness, and I mean, our old normal, who's to say that it was any good? I mean, we look at world statistics, and we have a much lower quality of life than Canada or many countries in Europe, countries in Asia. We are not, this is not necessarily the most comfortable society to live in. And, it just seems like, to me, it seems like it takes a pandemic
Yeah.
to like force folks to just stop for a second and think
Mhm.
about what's happening. I mean, we have people that are pissed because they can't go get their hair done. What the fuck is that?
I have no idea.
If your hair is that fucked up, get some fucking scissors and cut your hair.
Use a hat.
For real. I mean, when did we forget how to clip our own toenails? I mean, if you really need a pedicure or a manicure, there are tons of YouTube videos that can show you exactly how to do one, just like one of the professionals. I mean, I think one of the things that's happening is that we're showing how much of a selfish society we really are.
Mhm.
And I get, and I'm so understanding of this notion of, I mean, I grew up po folks too. I know what it's like to go without money and worry about where are you going to get money and how are you going to feed yourself and so on and so forth. My folks, we've been there. So I'm not saying this with a callous, middle class heart, because that's not where I'm coming from at all. But at the same time, come on, man. If we're talking about the possibility that hundreds of thousands of people could die from one single virus, and we're all not in agreement to let's face this head on and deal with it. It's like, I don't even know how to talk to people about it. I think that's probably one of the most frustrating things for me as an educator, as well as a citizen. I don't know how to talk to these folks. And that's, I don't know, because I don't think that it's always a matter of just a simple choice that people get to make. There are always larger consequences and larger issues that are at play. And there's a part of me that feels like, why can't we just, as a society, take 3-4 months and take a beat and say, hey,
Yep.
let's think about where we are and what's happening, where we're going, and where have we been, and use this as a way of advancing society as opposed to as a way of just constructing it as just this big pothole that we have to face, and then we can go right back to business as usual. I don't know if that's healthy for us as a society, as a collective, and I definitely think it's not healthy for a lot of individuals.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
So, and I was wondering, we kind of started to talk about pop culture, and then I took it.
Oh yeah, that's what we were talking about.
And then we went to.
It's in the title of the show.
Right.
It's been a really long time, friends.
And then, of course, I wanted to get to debuting the mental illness and pop culture theme song at the end of our show.
We better get there.
So the song that we have been using as the mental illness and pop culture theme song, we only use the instrumental part at the beginning and at the end, but it's really a whole song. And I made it into a little video to surprise you guys. It's the debut of this song, 30 years in the making. I recorded it when I was 25 years old. I recorded this music with my best friend, Paul Leach. And then I got hired back at Robinson High School as a Spanish teacher. And I had recorded this song. I thought it would be funny. It's a song of embracing being different and being yourself. It's called I'm Weird. And I'm trying to, it's almost like what we would call exposure therapy or flooding, that I'm trying to take something that could be offensive or could have power, but to such a ridiculous, exaggerated degree that it loses that offensiveness or the power. So we will close this episode. We are all over social media. We just talked about social media, mental illness and pop culture. Please sign up for our page on Facebook. We are also on Twitter and Instagram. We are on Gmail, mental illness and pop culture @gmail.com. We are also available on iTunes or wherever you get podcasts. Mental illness and pop culture, you can find us.
On to the song.
All right, so here it is, the world premiere, the debut of the song I'm Weird. Now, and I want to say this has swear words in it. So if you are offended by swear words, stop listening now. Thank you.
Or turn it up.
And we will be back next week.
I'm weird. I'm so fucking weird. He's weird, he's pretty weird. He's weird, he's really, really weird. I tell you one thing that gives me a thrill. It's taking my car and kill. But if I miss them, it gives me the jitters. Cause I like to eat them fuzzy little critters. He likes pizza, road pizza. I'm weird, I'm kinda weird. I'm weird, I'm weird. I'm so fucking weird. He's weird, he's really, really weird. I take nail polish and put it in my nose, and then I lick in between the toes. I wash it, I wipe it, I clean it up good. Put it on a rinse if I could.
Yummy.
I'm weird, I'm weird, I'm goddamn weird. I'm weird, I'm weird, I'm weird. I'm so fucking weird.
He's weird, he's pretty weird. He's weird, he's weird, he's gross.
I like going to the zoo. Love the animals, yes I do. But I like them even more now, wouldn't you? If we could put them all in a giant stew.
Soup's on.
I'm weird, I'm weird, I'm goddamn weird. I'm weird, I'm weird, I'm weird. I'm so fucking weird.
He's weird, he's weird, he's pretty weird. He's weird, he's weird, he's really bizarre.
Now if you're thinking I'm kinda strange, listen up, I'm really deranged. The weirdest thing that I've ever done is live in the town of Robinson,
Illinois, that is.
I'm weird, I'm weird, I'm goddamn weird. I'm weird, I'm weird, I'm weird. I'm so fucking weird.
He's weird, he's pretty weird. He's weird, he's fucked up.
Hey! Hey! Wait! What? So are you! It's true! So why don't you join me?
Okay.
We're weird, we're goddamn weird. We're weird, we're weird. We're so fucking weird! We're goddamn weird. We're weird, we're weird. We're so fucking weird. I'm so weird. You're so weird. We're so weird. We're goddamn weird. We're weird, we're weird. We're so fucking weird.